Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salam ala Rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our viewers, all our listeners from around the globe. I would like to welcome you to our talk for today, the anatomy of riba. So the first question arises is, why talk on riba? I mean, a simple answer is we all have great interest to keep learning, right? No, but in reality, we do have three answers to that question. First is, of course, education. Allah tells us in Surah Dariyat to remind, for indeed the reminder benefits the believers. And we aim to have this as a resource where people can get their questions answered, and even for later referral for your FAQs. Then we have our physical need, because riba is destroying our societies and we aren't aware of how it's happening. It keeps the poor poor and even pushes the middle class into poverty and an ever growing debt cycle, while the rich increase their wealth without creating any value. And third, and the most important, is the spiritual harm. So the Imam of Darul Hijrah, Imam Malik, he had said that certainly I looked into the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I did not see anything more evil than riba. This is because Allah declared war on those who consume it. So as Muslims, a lot of the time we take the concept of riba lightly, maybe as compared to other matters like alcohol or meat, where we are always on the forefront. Okay, is this meat halal? Where did you get it from? Who cut it? Did he say Bismillah? So many things. So it may be because we are not so directly in touch with riba. And this could be because it occurs under different names, hidden terminologies, or maybe even loophole mechanisms. So a very chilling narration that I just wanted to share before we start was where the Prophet ﷺ, he had said that a time will come upon the people where they will consume riba. And it was said to him, all of the people. So the Prophet ﷺ said, no, sorry. He said, whoever does not take from it will be afflicted by its dust. SubhanAllah, that's such a scary statement, right? And it gets even worse when you read it with regards to another hadith, where he talks about how a person is going to be traveling and he's going to be very tired, torn clothes, and he's going to be raising his hands up in dua. But the dua won't be accepted because the food is haram, the drink that he has is haram, the clothing that he has is haram. So how can the dua of such a person be answered? So without further ado, I would like to invite our esteemed guest for today, Mufti Yousuf Sultan. A quick introduction, though none is needed, as everyone here would know him, mashallah. So Mufti here is a certified Sharia advisor and auditor, as well as an Awafi master trainer. He holds a master's degree in Islamic finance from INSEF, and he has graduated as a Mufti from Jamia Sharia in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Mufti Yousuf is also a registered Sharia advisor with the Securities Commission of Malaysia. Today, he is the founder and CEO of Adal Advisory, that is based in Malaysia, as well as the co-founder of IFA Consultancy in Bangladesh. And through all his efforts, he has been providing Sharia advisory, consultancy, training services, and of course, education to various industries and individuals. So without further ado, the floor is all yours, Brother Yousuf. We start. So the way we are keeping this whole event is a bit of a Q&A kind of format instead of Mufti just going on, because sometimes our people they get distracted and whatnot. So we want to keep it a bit more interactive. So starting off, Mufti Yousuf, I'll throw the first question. Can you tell us what riba is? Let's start from the very basics. So to remove any doubts from the minds of the people, right? What is riba?
Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Muhammadin Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi ajma'in. Thank you very much, Brother Zahid, for a very good context about the whole topic. Very timely. I mean, this topic is always timely. Whatever we discuss, in what era we discuss, because this is one of the most important prohibitions in Al-Quran and Sunnah, which every Muslim must understand, must know, and try their level best to avoid, as it's haram. So at the same time, it's a topic that has various branches and has been always discussed in length by the jurists, by the fuqaha, as well as we see a number of traditions from the various companions, Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, as well, where it is mentioned that like riba might not be fully understood by them because it has so many branches, as I mentioned. Well, having said that, I will try to put it into a few things. I hope it's easier for us to understand. But again, it's not. It will not be comprehensive. As a disclaimer, I must mention that there are numerous literature, and people should go back and read and enlighten themselves to further learn. All right. So first and foremost, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala mentioned riba in Al-Quran Kareem. He mentioned about the prohibitions in various verses. One of the most popular one, which we know from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 275, where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has mentioned, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa halallahu al-bay'a wa harrama riba. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has permitted trade and He has forbidden riba. And followed by a few other verses as well, where the prohibition goes on to the extent He also said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa dharu ma baqiya min al-riba in kuntum mu'minin fa in lam taf'alu fa'adhanu biharbin min Allahi wa rasuli. The verse which Brother Zahid also referred to, that if you don't avoid riba, then declare war against Allah and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this verse has been termed as one of the most fearful verses of Al-Quran by Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. And then Imam Malik rahimahullah said, Inni tasahfahtu kitab Allahi wa sunnat nabiyyi falam ara shay'an asharra min al-riba لأن الله سبحانه وتعالى أذن فيه بالحرب, that I have looked around in Quran and Sunnah, but I haven't seen anything worse than riba, because Allah has declared war against those who take riba. So there are numerous other hadiths and verses as well. Now, what exactly is riba? Riba literally means to increase, and in Sharia we find basically hadiths as well as verses. So the verses, I mentioned few of those, and then in hadith we have a very popular hadith where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned about 6 items, and then he, for example, he mentioned about wheat, barley, then tamar, dates, and few others, including gold and silver. And he mentioned that those items must be traded yadan biyadin, mithlan bi mithlin, on spot, as well as equal value. So that is one of the primary hadiths. Now, looking at those verses and those hadiths, the fuqaha, the jurists, have mentioned there are basically 2 types of riba. One is riba al-buyu', which happens in our transactions, in our sale transactions of commodities. The other one is riba al-duyun, or also known as riba al-qurud or riba al-jahiliyyah, which happens in our debt transactions or loan transactions. This was also something very well understood during the time of Jahiliyyah. Now, when it comes to defining riba, the thing is the riba al-jahiliyyah. Often, fuqaha have mentioned that the one that has been prohibited in Al-Quran actually refers to riba al-jahiliyyah, or the riba al-duyun, or the riba al-quruz, the increase that we charge against loan. For example, I gave someone $1,000 and I'm charging back $1,050 or $1,100. So that's the most prominent form, and that was well understood by the people in the era of Jahiliyyah as well. So this was so evident.
We call it riba al-Quran and riba al-Sunnah.
We can call it riba al-Quran as well. Yeah, because as I mentioned, people easily understood. And when Allah is saying that وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, and before that He is saying ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَا, that people used to say that bay' or trade is similar to riba. basically they drew a bit of similarity, and that's where that's how they used to basically understand the riba duyun. And when the Quranic prohibition came, they easily understood about that. So we can also call it riba al-Quran. Now the other one, which is basically a prohibition by Sunnah, by the hadith of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is where a lot of arguments or debates among the fuqaha happened throughout the history. The reason being is that Prophet ﷺ mentioned 6 commodities. But what is the common illah? What is the common reason of the ruling between the 6? So this is where the different schools of fiqh have different views, etc. Now, when defining, so I was giving the context because when it comes to defining, so we will find a lot of fuqaha have defined riba based on riba al-buyu'. But then some fuqaha has also included both. They tried to make the definition a bit more comprehensive. So it includes both riba al-Quran or the riba al-Jahiliyyah, as well as riba al-buyu' or riba al-Fadl, also known as riba al-Fadl. But anyway, in summary, it's basically an increase, any type of increase in exchange contracts of commodities, or increase in a loan contract or a debt contract against time. So the second part basically addresses the riba al-Quran. So it's an increase against loan or debt. The first one that I mentioned, it addresses the riba al-Fadl, which is also mentioned in Sunnah, which tackles the exchange contracts of commodities. So I hope it's a bit summary. If you want to go details, we can go, inshallah. Thank you.
Right. Jazakallah khair. Mufti, you mentioned that in riba that is mentioned in the Sunnah, it refers to 6 ribawi items. So is it restricted to just these 6 items, or how do we understand this hadith over here?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, and that's the one I was referring to. It's narrated by several companions, Radwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. So one of them, for example, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, he narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt, those are to be like for like and hand to hand in equal amounts. Whoever pays or takes more has indulged in riba. The taker and the giver are alike, meaning in guilt. So this is recorded by Imam Muslim rahimahullah in his Sahih. Now, what is the common feature in all 6 items? So usually the fuqaha has categorized the items into two categories, broad categories. The first one is, of course, gold and silver, which extends to the other mediums of exchanges as well. So this is where we will, later on, we will also discuss, inshallah, that today we have a lot of different types of currencies. The fuqaha has argued, the jurists have argued that those will also be included under the ruling of these 2, gold and silver, because the modern currencies are also medium of exchange, like last time, gold and silver. Now, the other 4 items, what is the common feature? So this is where we see the fuqaha have argued. So some would say it's only for food items, because all other 4 items are food. So when we are exchanging any food items for other food items, we have to be mindful about those. Some would say the common feature is basically the feature of being weighted or being fungible, for example, not non-fungible. So whenever those features extend, we will have the extension of riba, the ruling of riba there. So the fuqaha has argued and extended the ruling to various other aspects as well, and some might have also restricted to only those 6 items, as Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned. This is the beauty of Sharia. This is the beauty of Islam and the fuqaha, that they have done extensive research to find what exactly is the common underlying reason of prohibition of riba in those items. Thank you.
All right, Jazakumullah khair. So
yeah,
moving forward, I think it'll be good if we touch upon the very history of riba, right? So were we the first nation for who riba was prohibited, and when was it prohibited for the Muslims?
Yeah. So it's a very interesting question, because we often may think that Muslims are the first nation that riba was prohibited upon. However, if we go into the history, we will find that all the religions, the true religions by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the kitab of those were revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, had the prohibition of riba. For example, if we talk about Yahud, the Judaism, so there is a verse in Al Quran which basically says, which condemns the Jews, saying وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ, that basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is condemning them and then saying this is because of them taking riba or involving riba, وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ, and while they were prohibited from taking riba. So this refers that it was also prohibited to the Jews. Similarly, if we look at the Christianity or the religion of Isa alayhi salam, for example, even to the Bible, the version of Bible that we have today, we will see in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Luke, there we'll see some references which shows that riba is still considered prohibited. In fact, in Gospel of Matthew as well. Similarly, in other religions as well, we find some common prohibitions of interest, of riba, even to some other modern, like Aristotle, Plato, for example. They also have some references saying or condemning riba. So it's not something new to the new revelation to the Muslims. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and even the modern civilizations or the ancient civilizations, at some point we see some common consideration to consider riba as something forbidden or prohibited. Now, in terms of Islam, we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Islam came, was revealed upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam through Quran as a religion, people were involved in riba. We mentioned that, especially riba al-Quran or riba al-Qurud or riba al-Duyun. Now, to prohibit that, Quran or Sharia took a gradual approach instead of basically suddenly prohibiting at once. So we see the first verse which was revealed in Makkah. In that, it was in Surah Al-Rum, verse number 39. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that whatever you pay as interest so that it may increase the wealth of people does not increase in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا يَرْبُعْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. As for the zakah that you give, seeking it with Allah's good pleasure, that is multiplied manifold. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the very first verse is basically comparing between riba and zakah, that you think riba increases your wealth while it does not. Rather, if you pay zakah, if you pay charity, it increases multiple folds in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the second verse, which was early in the Madani period, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Imran in verse 130, believers, do not swallow interest, doubles or redoubles, la ta'kulu riba adha'afa mudha'afa, and be mindful of Allah so that you may attain true success. So it kind of gives an impression that the multifold interest is prohibited, but not the simple interest is not prohibited. But then if we look at the next verse, which is also in the Medina after Hijrah, around fourth year after 4 year after Hijrah, in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a bit different perspective. And for taking their interest, which had been prohibited to them, the verse that I recited a couple of minutes ago regarding the Jews, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is condemning the Yahud and saying, وَأَكْلِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ. This is due to them taking riba while they were prohibited from that, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also mentioning about the punishment, and for the unbelievers among them we have prepared a painful chastisement. So this is in Surah An-Nisa verse 16. And then we have this in the fourth stage, we have this series of verses, a number of verses in Surah Al-Baqarah, starting from verse 275 to 281, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares completely that وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has permitted trade and he has forbidden riba. Then he goes after what we shared earlier as well, that فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأَذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. If you don't leave riba, then declare war against Allah and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions about the one who will be involved in riba, that he will be basically standing on the day of judgment, just like someone as with junoon, with some sort of madness, where shaitan has fully captured him. So all those things have been clearly mentioned in this verse. So this was the gradual revelation of verses to prohibit riba. I would stop here, Brother Zahid. We
Yes.
can further discuss, inshallah.
Right. So usually when we are reading the Sirah, right, so we see incidents that indicate that certain thing has become prohibited. Like when the ayat or the prohibition of alcohol came down, we
Yep.
found that people were throwing all their utensils and pouring it down the streets of Medina. So do we have any similar incident that because of which these ayat came down, or around which we find that people were implementing these ayat?
Yeah, that's a good question. We definitely have. And Allah, in the same verse that we were saying that where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa dharu ma baqiya min riba. So there were debt transactions and loan transactions. So Allah is basically saying that you can take the capital, but you should leave riba. So I cannot recall any particular incident right now, but there are multiple incidents we can see throughout the seerah, that the companions Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, they immediately followed the verses, the new ruling, and they gave up the riba component of the transactions they had, so that they can only obtain capital from those transactions and no further riba they are involved in.
I was reading in one of the books, and Mufti, you could correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the incidents that the scholars mention, in addition to what you have highlighted, also was during the Battle of Uhud. So this was where the prohibition somewhat got implemented, because the Meccan armies were financed from riba funding. So it was kind of a put off for the Muslims that, we are weak. So these ayat came down to tell them not to engage in such. I think Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani collected this as well. Hi, inshallah. So moving forward then, we've understood what riba is, we've defined what riba is, we've seen what the origins of riba were from the different world religions and in Islam. So the number one question now is, why was it even prohibited in the first place? Because the question is, okay, let's say I've given money to someone, and now you're taking more time to pay me back. So that's harm for me. So technically you should be paying me more money to compensate me, right? So what is this prohibition of riba? Why is it so harmful that we have a war being declared?
That's a very interesting question. And before I address this question, I must share my thought process on this. Like, whenever there is a prohibition by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, Allah has prohibited us from drinking wine, for example, right? So apparently some may find some temporary pleasure, but at the end, it may cause long-term harm to the individual, to the person, and in fact to the whole society. Now, often we may or may not be able to discover all the harms that are there inside the prohibition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed upon us, right? But as a mu'min, as a believer, the very first thing we must do is to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to submit in the sense that we may not understand the whole philosophy, the whole objective, but definitely, certainly, this is something beneficial for me. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Sharia, as the one who is driving the Sharia, who is the owner of Sharia, he has given us this ruling. Now, having said that, if we look at what are the harms of riba, the fuqaha, the jurists, they would often emphasize on the few things that are derived directly from Quran and Sunnah. For example, few Brother Zahid you have also mentioned. For example, not du'as not being accepted. I mean, those more about our relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So du'as not accepted. This is very much evident from a hadith where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned about the person who has done a long travel and he was very tired, right? So at that point of time when he raises his hands, ya Allah, accept my prayer. But Allah is saying, like, why would his prayer be accepted? Because his food and drink, his clothing, everything is from mal haram, haram wealth. So this is one. Secondly, for example, the elimination of barakah or blessing from our wealth. This is also in the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Yamhaqullahu riba wa yurbi sadaqat, that Allah wipes out riba and then yurbi sadaqat, he increases sadaqah or charity, right? So, and then we will also find traditions of Sunnah, where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was shown punishment of the person who involved in riba during the night of Isra and Mi'raj by Jibril alayhi salam, when he was shown a lot of punishments as well as incidents from Jannah. So those things, and also coupled with the azab in akhirah, the azab in qabr, etc., a lot of traditions, etc., we get a full picture or a big picture of what's going to happen for the person in the akhirah. Now, the fuqaha has often emphasized on those aspects, right? Even, for example, the sadaqah or the charity not being accepted, right? Apart from dua, also there are other things that that one must be concerned. But those are all, one can argue that all are in relation to akhirah. So how does it impact me as an individual or the society? Now, as Brother Zahid, you also mentioned about a hadith where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, which is also reported by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, that لا يأتين على الناس زمان لا يبالي المرء بما أخذ المال من الحلال من الحرام. There would be a day where people would not care where he's taking money from. Is it from a halal source or a haram source? So, end of the day, people may not care. Like, why do I care? Na'uzubillah zalik. I mean, by it should have been the default concern, right? As a believer, it should have been the default concern of how I would answer on the day of judgment, regardless of the economic impact or the worldly impact. But nonetheless, if we look at other than the direct narrations from Sunnah or the verse of Quran, the fuqaha, the Salaf Salihin mentioned few other things as well. For example, when we are involved in riba, it also impacts our economic fasad or the anarchy in the total economy. And now Muslim economies have discovered a lot of other things. The riba, when money becomes a commodity, because end of the day, what happens in riba buyo or riba diyun? What happens is that money becomes a commodity. We exchange money for money, and that brings few other harms. We get less interested to invest in real economy. For example, I believe now it's very evident for every country in globally, everyone is concerned about food security, about high prices of food, about inflation, about logistics, this and that. So very basic needs, right? We were very much like into a different world, in a financial world where we just deal with papers, etc., futures, forward, this and that. But now back to basics, people are very much concerned about food security because they see that end of the day, that's what we cannot eat money. We have to convert it into something tangible that we can use and we can benefit from. So that might be one reason. Why I'm not saying it's a definite reason, because Prophet ﷺ has not mentioned the Sharia has not mentioned it, but that could be a very definite reason, as Muslim economists have pointed out. It also it also influences in inflation, as it's very evident today. Interest rate has a very direct relationship with inflation rate as well. It also has impact on the aspect of which Sharia has a very big concern about. So the wealth doesn't become concentrated among the few hands of the rich, right? So that's what is a big motive of capitalism. So the Muslim economists have also shared that the riba has a direct impact on that as well. So those are some of the other aspects. But again, as I mentioned earlier as well, we might not have yet discovered all the harms, right? The Sharia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows better how how deep it harms us. But it is evident from various incidents, even the 2007-8 financial crisis. There are multiple reports which shows us that due to the debt crisis, and a very root of the debt crisis is, of course, getting money for money in a very easy manner through interest. Those have been one of the significant reasons. We can relate those as well. I would stop here, Brother Zahid. If you want to add on some other aspect, please do.
No, definitely. I mean, you've covered main points that we were thinking of. And I think the biggest factor that keeps coming to mind again and again is the unfairness of the whole setup, right?
Yes,
That
yes.
I'm going forward, I'm asking money. You give me money, your money is still safe. But now I have to give you more money.
Yep. That's the very like macro view of Sharia, we could say. The Sharia in all aspect, like why Sharia sometimes, I mean, it's unfortunate that the world we live today, sometimes some of the punishments of Sharia are shown in a manner that those are inhumane and those and this and that. However, everything that Sharia has imposed us has a very definite reason, and end of the day, it is for the salah, it is for the benefit of the entire society and the entire ummah. So the prohibition of riba, because the moment we try to manipulate the system and we think that, okay, let's do this way, so it is more equitable, more fair to this party, we will end up giving more fairness to one party at the cost of doing zulm or oppression to the other party, right? So Sharia gave us few very basic principles. If we adhere to those, we will find at the end of the day, it is equitable and fair to all the parties, because Sharia is for everyone. It does not have a special favor for the top 5% or something, and then it leaves out the rest 95%. It does not do that. So it gives us a guidance for a system that will ensure fairness and equity, justice for everyone. So that's the concept of adl, that's the concept of excellence or ihsan, that Sharia in all aspect tries to enforce it. Of course, through muamalat as well. So riba, by the way, riba is one of the few other prohibitions in Sharia when it comes to muamalat or economics or finance or trade. But there are a few others. But what is the common value proposition in all of those? The common value proposition is to ensure adl, ensure fairness, and to eliminate zulm or oppression. So as you have rightly said, Brother Zahid, Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah. I really like that last point that you mentioned about the adl in the society, because the focus is on justice. And
Right.
it's not always about equality, it's about equity. And Allah does justice to everyone. So I mean that's something we don't really reflect on much. We have a question that's related. One of the brothers are asking, when we say riba, our mind directly goes to interest, and that's it. Would that be a correct understanding? I think we've touched this a bit, but I think I'll leave Mufti to answer this.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So riba is not equal to interest, or interest is not equal to riba. Rather, riba is much more comprehensive than what we know as interest, right? Much more comprehensive, and this is why we may find riba in a partnership contract as well. If the the conditions or the terms are not as per the Sharia guideline, we may find riba in many other places, right? But usually interest, we term as interest only in few aspects. So riba, to answer as in one sentence, riba is much more comprehensive than interest. It has many more branches than interest, and using interest as a synonym of riba is not the right way, but just for easiness, we often refer to interest. But again, riba is much more than that. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So moving forward, I mean, this is going to be what I call the elephant in the room. conventional banking. So moving forward, like, I mean, we have to interact, we transact, and the world is basically run by financing, right? So
Yeah.
what would you say is the difference between a conventional bank and the options today that we have in the name of Islamic banking? What's the difference? What makes it Islamic? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very important question, and something that strikes every single believer's mind. We speak out or not, right? What exactly is the difference between the two? Before I go to the answer, I would like to first put a disclaimer that, see, when we talk about conventional banking, it's a system that has evolved over almost 5 centuries or even more. And today we are in a world that has, in which the conventional banking system has become very, very matured with all types of regulations, laws, rulings, court decisions, this and that, right? So, but in the contrary, when we talk about Islamic banking, this is something very new. We just started the Islamic Development Bank. It was just formed in 1975. And after that, more or less, we will see the Islamic banking, Islamic banks around the globe has started emerging. In Malaysia, Malaysia started the first Islamic bank, Bank Islam Malaysia Berhad, in 1983. In the same year, Bangladesh also started Islamic Bank, Bangladesh Limited, and more or less other Islamic banks emerged around the globe. So now as well, when we are sitting in talking about those things in 2022 November, we still have a lack of regulation in many countries, no act in many countries, a significant lack of human resources, a lack of awareness about between the customers, the depositors, the beneficiaries of the fund, the corporates, the businesses, etc. So a lot of disconnect, and even Sharia scholars, for example. So with all those said, a lot of things that we say today, when we talk about differences, may still be theoretical. What I mean by that, practically we may not have yet been able to implement all those, or maybe the level of implementation in one country vis-a-vis another country is very different, right? So if it's a non-Muslim country, maybe the country is just starting Islamic banking, or maybe there is no Islamic bank at all, right? In a matured Muslim country, it may be different. So we have to keep those aspects in our mind. But at the same time, I want to always emphasize on this, that we have no other choice but to get rid of riba. So conventional banking interest, is it riba? This is something has been debated very long among the Sharia scholars back in last century. And I would maybe recall about the decision in the second session of Islamic Fiqh Academy, Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami, where the scholars have argued a lot, and then they resolved that they all agreed that the interest component in the conventional banking is riba. So when we know this is riba, then we have to get rid of it, right? So this is where the concept of Islamic banking comes in. Now, having said that, remember this whole conventional banking setup is not that we started. It has been already there, has already matured, regulations and everything that I mentioned already, right? So we are trying to put Islamic version into this, right? So it's a new party, it's a new participant in the game. You have the rules of the games already set, and you have very less room to change the rules. But within that, since as a believer, since as a Muslim, we must get out of riba. So that's where the humble, I would say, the trials of the scholars, their efforts, the economists and the practitioners, everyone that comes into the picture, right? Now, what would be the main differences between Islamic banking and conventional banking? In an ideal scenario, in Islamic banking, on top of being intermediary between the depositor and the financial beneficiaries, there would also be a bit of trader, right, where they sell and buy things, right? Because there would be also some sort of investor, because they would be investing the funds from the depositors. But in the current context, we have limitations. However, with all those said, we still have the main principles of restricting ourselves to only halal. So that, for example, if a non-halal sector comes to an Islamic bank cannot fund them, right? So if it's a wine company, if it's a tobacco, if it's a conventional banking, they come for financing through Islamic bank, it will not be allowed. Similarly, there are other value propositions. There are the aspects of Sadaqah and Zakat, and most importantly, the contractual relationships, like how you interact or engage with the bank. So in conventional bank, either it is on the deposit side or in the asset side or interbank or with the central bank, everything is based on interest-bearing loan contract. But in the Islamic banking context, on top of other things that I have mentioned, all the contracts will be replaced with Sharia compliant contracts. So on the deposit side, many countries will do mudaraba, for example, which is a profit and risk loss sharing partnership contract, where one party provides the funds and the other party manages it for an agreed upon profit sharing ratio. So this is being practiced in many countries. There were other contracts as well, like wadi'a, which is a safekeeping deposit, then tawarruq, which is a commodity murabaha. Those are also some of the contracts being practiced on the deposit side. On the asset side, since we cannot just give money for money, so there has to be some services or some assets underlying to it. And this is why you will see some sale contracts, for example, goods murabaha. This is one of the very popular contracts globally, where a consumer comes to the bank and they request for a particular asset. The bank purchases it. Of course, in many cases, they will reappoint the consumer as an agent to purchase it. And once they get hold of it, they will sell it to the consumer at a higher price. This is known as murabaha. There would be also lease contracts, financial lease, also known as ijara. There would be some other contracts as well, and some partnership-based contracts as well. So in Islamic banking, we need the philosophy, Islamic philosophy. At the same time, the contracts must be Sharia compliant as well. With those two things, we have the basic ground, but that's not the destination. So today, when we are having this webinar, we have some good additional initiatives. For example, in Malaysia, by the Central Bank of Malaysia, we have an initiative called Value-Based Intermediation, or VBI. The whole purpose of VBI is that the Islamic banks should not just stick to the very basic level of contractual compliance, rather how they can create additional value to the society by picking and prioritizing some projects on top of other, which gives more value to the society, more value to the community. So they call it halal tayyib. So it's not just halal, it's not the bare minimum, but it's even tayyib, it's even better. So those are some of the initiatives that we see in various jurisdictions. People are trying their best, and I would encourage everyone that we need to really enlighten ourselves with the very basic knowledge itself, at least, so that we can also contribute to this ecosystem, and we collectively get better and better, inshallah. Jazakallah.
So just building on this, right? A common criticism, I would say, that comes about by many people is that a lot of the time we are so wanting to Islamicize or halalize the conventional banking that we might take their product and just change the names. So let's say if there's interest, we call it profit, we call it gift. So I just wanted to get your perception on what exactly does Sharia compliance here mean, or what does happen in the life of a Sharia advisor? I mean, since we have you here, might as well we get a glimpse into your life.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We have experienced this as well, and people are now very clever, mashallah. So they often, I would also always assume it's with good intention, but perhaps due to lack of knowledge, that often people think that if we replace the word interest with profit, is done, right? And this creates even more confusion to the public, because people who are doing business, they have very good intellectual ability. So the moment they see it's the same offering, just with the change of the name, without any contractual implications on rights and obligations, they can easily find out that is the same offering given in the name of Islamic. So this is where a lot of confusion, rather I would say reputational crisis happens. Any Islamic banks or any Islamic financial institution must be very, very concerned about those things, because a reputational damage is very difficult to overcome compared to financial damage or other things. So back to the question, it is not sufficient just to change the terminologies, because in Sharia we have a very important legal maxim that al-ibratu bil maqasid wal ma'ani la lil alfaz wal mabadi. That the ibra, I mean the one which will get importance is the underlying maqasid, underlying objective, underlying reasons of any given contract or any given issue, not the wording only, not the surface only. In other words, it's not only the form, we will look into the substance as well. So if we just change the names, it doesn't really matter. We also need to see how the implications are driven. Are those in compliance with Sharia or not? Thank you.
Jazakumullah khair. So moving forward, like still remaining within this umbrella of the banking system, how would we understand the difference between an Islamic credit card and a normal conventional credit card? Because if you're not paying back anything, if we default, so how does it even work?
Right. Firstly, credit cards or any credit, I think this is something that we need to discuss a lot, because Sharia, I mean, when we are talking about any sale contract or any partnership, sorry, not sale, partnership contract, that's very obvious. Sharia encourages us to circulate our wealth through proper investments, etc. But when it comes to getting indebted or taking loans or credit, this is something Sharia does not encourage us much, especially when we leave the world with dain, with debt on our shoulders, and the debt passes to the next generation. This is something Sharia doesn't like. There are multiple traditions of Sunnah where we see Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he was approached about a dead body that has came to the community for janaza, he asked this very first question, that did he leave any dain or not? Alayhi dainu. And if the answer was positive that yes, there has been some debt he left behind, Prophet ﷺ would usually say, okay, you guys can pray, instead of him going to lead the prayer. And furthermore, when it was assured that some other companion radiallahu anh would take the responsibility to pay his debt off, then only Prophet ﷺ would go and pray his janazah. Similarly, we can also see traditions where Prophet ﷺ says something around like, when a person dies as shaheed, all of his sins are forgiven illa dain, except debt, except the loan that he has left behind. Similarly, Prophet ﷺ also mentioned al-matul ghani zulmun, the procrastination of a ghani, of someone rich who can pay but he is not paying, he's delaying, is also considered as zulm, as a form of oppression. So with those considerations, in general, we get a picture that Sharia does not like credit much, I mean, indebtedness or loans much. Yes, you do business, you make profit, you share and all those things, but getting credit so much is not something that Sharia likes much. But on the other hand, if someone is in dire need, right, so then Sharia will also encourage him to give loan. Man zalladhi yuqridu Allah qardan hasana, the very famous verse in Al-Quran, who is there to give qard hasan, or good loans. Good loans mean which doesn't have interest, which doesn't have riba, right? So how we give good loans to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? By helping his slaves, basically by giving loans to human beings who are in dire need. Now, if we strike a balance between the two, we will see that for an Islamic bank, credit card is not something, is just like a product on the shelf. It's not something to make profit out of it, right? It's not a product like that. Because how can we extend cash credit in Sharia? If we look at the principles, because to extend cash credit, we have to extend loan, but loan we cannot profit out of it. So we may have some cash transactions, like in some countries, tawarruk is also practiced. But then, is it organized versus not organized? A lot of Sharia questions are also there. So we will see some Islamic banks are offering based on qarz, based on loan, but at the same time extending some additional services and charging fees for those additional services, right? Which is known as qarz plus ujra model. Now, we understand that there is a dire need for those service charges as well. But if you look at the very basics, why we are doing Islamic banking? To avoid riba. What is riba? The very prominent form is riba duyun, riba qurud, the increase that we charge against loan, right? And this is why the jurists are very, very particular when it comes to associating any fee or any benefit with loan. So, for example, we have loan contract. At the same time, we are attaching a buyer contract, a sale contract, and in the sale contract, we are getting a profit. So it becomes under the umbrella of bay wa salaf. So it's a sale plus loan, which Sharia would not allow. Then, okay, we don't want to attach a buyer, but what if we have a loan and then we have some intangible benefit or tangible benefits, not monetary increase. So I give someone $1,000 loan, but I say, okay, you also pay me back $1,000 loan, but I would drive your car for 1 month. Right? I will stay at your house for 1 month. So that's a benefit in addition to the $1,000 I was supposed to get back. And Sharia says very specifically that kullu qardin jara naf'an fahuwa riba. The whatever benefit dragged with the loan contract is also considered as riba. So end of the day, I mean, these are some of the context I wanted to set. Now, if we look at the latest IOFI Sharia standard, most probably 61, if I'm not mistaken, IOFI has recently issued that on payment cards. So in that, it has IOFI has very, very specifically mentioned about the ujra, the fees that a bank can charge against a loan credit card, a card credit card. So we will see that the fees are basically the very actual fees or direct fees which the bank has to pay to a third party, all right, for providing this service. For example, it has to pay to, let's say, MasterCard or Visa card gateway, or it has to pay to maybe the ATM machine vendor. It has to pay to the card manufacturer, for example. So those are the actual fees a financial institution can charge. Anything addition to that, very, very skeptic we have to be, because it may be considered as a benefit against the riba. So that's what IOFI Sharia standard tried to define. But I believe it's yet to be implemented by any financial institution globally. At least I'm not aware of. It's a transition, I would say. Many credit cards we have seen before, which are not in line with the Sharia standard, and it's a gradual process. Again, I must remind everyone, including myself, that see, we are in a gradual process of getting better and better. So today, where we are, we were not there 50 years back. 50 years back, we were nowhere, right? So Alhamdulillah, we are in a very good position. We have a sizable industry now, so we can speak about, people are giving us importance, and inshallah, we'll get better. With all those sessions, your involvement, you have come today to listen to us, ask questions. So these are all part of the process, and we make dua, inshallah, so that we can get better. Jazakallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. I mean, it's quite interesting to see that there's such a thin line that they have to be accountable to the very last dot, that if it's more charge, it falls under riba.
Right.
They have calculated very precisely that these are our actual costs and you can't inflate it also, because I mean, Allah is watching.
And at the same time, you see the depositors are not depositing funds here for Qad Hasan, right? They want to profit from it. So it's a dilemma for the financial institutions, because on one hand you have this, on the other hand you have this. So it's a difficult balance they have to strike. And again, I would say that it's a journey we are taking. We may not at the destination yet, but we shouldn't be frustrated as well. We should try our best so that I can see what impact I can create. Maybe a very small dot, very small change I have made, but that's maybe very significant in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah.
Definitely, definitely. We are getting quite a few questions. I would like to request and remind all our viewers, the questions that you're sending in, don't make it very, very specific about a certain organization or a product. What we're trying to establish over here are general principles and concepts. So questions regarding that and clarifications regarding that will make it quite easy and more beneficial, inshallah. All right, so Mufti, one question we have here is, what are your thoughts on the practices of the Islamic banking industry, where the products are fixed income in nature and in reality might not have any commercial risk to a typical interest-bearing loan?
Right. So if we look from the journey perspective, as I was mentioning, the very first thing that the scholars and the economists, the legal practitioners, everyone together on board have tried to do is to fix the form. So in terms of form, because there are also traditions in Sunnah as well as the jurists over the last 14 centuries, in some cases, it's very difficult to completely comply with the form and substance to get out of riba, but it's a very dire need. So there we would see the scholars have advised to at least comply with the form so that the form is not Sharia non-compliant. Substance-wise, it may have some similarities with the riba transactions. So in line with that, if we look, what was the question again, Brother Zahid? Sorry.
Most of the products are fixed income in nature.
Oh yeah, fixed income. So if you look at right, if you look at this products, what's happening around the globe in Islamic banking context is we practice some sale-based contracts, some ijara-based or rental-based contracts, and then some musharaka or partnership-based contracts. But usually those musharaka in most cases are also combined with ijara rental contracts. So in both sale and ijara, you have a fixed return component. This is on the asset side. And then on the deposit side, there is, as I mentioned earlier, it could be, if it's tawarruq, commodity murabaha as practiced in some countries, that's a value sale transaction as well. IUFI also has a Sharia standard around that. If it complies with all the requirements, it's a Sharia compliant, no issue. And that also has a fixed return, right? Because it's a sale. When I sell to someone, I know the price must be fixed. So through that, there is a fixed return. If it's a mudaraba in the deposit side, as practiced in many other countries as well, in that case, what happens is between the depositor and the Islamic financial institution, there is a profit sharing ratio agreed upon. However, there is also an expected rate of return on investment or ROI, which is settled and adjusted annually based on the actual profit sharing ratio. And of course, there are also reserves for provisional reserves, etc., so that if the profit goes below the expected threshold, it can be equalized. So there is a profit equalization reserve, for example, PER, and a few other adjustments are there. In summary, that also kind of gives an expected rate of return. I would not say fixed, because legally it's not fixed. It's based on the profit sharing ratio, but because of several other arrangements, as well as risk mitigation strategies by the risk management team, etc., you have something as per expected or close to what is expected, of course, based on previous performance as well. And on this, if it's a sale contract, it's very easy. It's a fixed return. So the point is, sometimes it may not be evident that we have economic impact differences in all cases. But one thing very, very important is that in almost all transactions in Islamic financial institutions, there must be an underlying asset or services or business. So the risk component must be there. Now, risk can be mitigated, no issue, but risk cannot be eliminated. That's what basically being practiced. Of course, when we sell a commodity, it's being sold, so the only risk is the default risk. The buyer may pay, may not pay, right? So that's the last risk usually one would take when it comes to a financing through a sale-based contract. So I think I did not answer your question directly, but just try to give some perspectives, which gives us a broader understanding of how it works. End of the day, if we are following a Sharia compliant contract, a Sharia compliant transaction with all its requirements, it's Sharia compliant, it is halal. Even though we don't see visually, we don't see any notable difference, but as long as it is Sharia compliant contract, it is halal, and as long as it is halal, there is no questions, right? So that's hopefully gives some good understanding. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. All right, let's take a step back, and I'm going to take a bit of a deep dive here, right? Going back to conventional banking, and maybe even challenge the whole fiat system right now. Because another question that we got, and it's quite interesting, right? They're saying the whole fiat system that we are living in today, we are surrounded by it, our lives are run by it. They say that itself is based on riba. Like, firstly, of course, we have the discussion about gold-backed currencies, but that's not a reality today. And the very currencies that are going out and that we are using, they were created out of debt and not necessarily just printed by the banks. Right. So when we say that the whole currency system or the fiat currency system is built or originating from riba, how would you advise us to tackle this?
All right. Yeah, it's a very hot topic when we discuss about Islamic banking, like how we how do we see or how we perceive the entire system of fractional reserve banking? Because end of the day, it allows the banks to create money from almost nothing, right? So that's the whole system of money creation. I want to give, again, I may not be able to answer directly, but I would like to give two perspectives here. The first one is riba. To determine riba, we have a very specific methodology which the scholars of 14th centuries have developed. A lot of arguments, debates, research have gone through. Now, in line with those methodologies, we may not be able to detect riba in just having fractional reserve banking. This must be loud and clear, right? This is number one. Of course, we see a lot of economic facade due to this system, and this is not something that only Muslim economists are concerned about. I recently came across a proposal from Switzerland. It's called a MOMO proposal, something like that, MOMO, which is basically an association. They are calling for kind of full reserve banking. Now, full reserve banking would mean that whatever amount the banks can lend, they have to have that amount of deposit. But in this proposal, they have a bit of difference. What they're saying that bank may lend or may finance more than what they have, but that additional deficit must be borrowed from the central bank. So end of the day, the money creation capability would only be sitting with the central bank, because central bank, as the kind of guardian of the whole economy, they of course, if there is corruption, then that's a whole different thing. We are not going there, but we must assume that they are assuming that guardianship, and in line with that, they must take into consideration what is good and benefiting for the economy, and they may create money, but that have to be borrowed in whatever the way by the bank, and then only it can lend. So we can, what I'm trying to emphasize is that they see the harm of this, the bad thing side of this is evident. People understand that And we see some initiatives being taken, but end of the day, it's it's again, as I mentioned earlier, it's like changing the rule of the whole game, right? So it's a long process. And I also, if you go to that proposal, you will see that it was not accepted, right? It was kind of rejected or not given much importance, and we can understand why, because the entire system is built on that. And we see the problem of this money creation, and not only this banking, fractional reserve banking. I must say, if you look at earlier generations of scholars were very, very particular about giving the capability of creating money to anyone else other than Baitul Mal, other than the government, because they just said it would create fasad, khalas. And they even, some of them were very, they stipulated about certain grief punishment to the one who creates money other than the government permission or whatever. Again, why? For the facade. Now today we see a lot of different types of money as well. We see cryptocurrencies, for example. I'm not going to that direction, but again, I mean, we see what's happening recently. People are losing their money, etc., etc. So it was always a concern. And again, I would say it's not riba in the system, right? Again, but it doesn't mean if there is no riba, there is no harm. Definitely there is harm, and we must collectively try to find out of it. But the question is what we do between now and until we get that solution, right? So this is where we have to put our efforts. We cannot just sit back and have a daydream that, suddenly tomorrow everything will change. No, it will never happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that very clear in the Quran Kareem. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. I maybe have missed one or two words. I'm not Hafiz, but the essence of the verse is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't, overnight change things for people until and unless they change themselves. So we have to put the efforts. We have to take the challenges and then rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and inshallah, the change will happen. But I agree with the main question. It is harmful. It is harmful, definitely. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. I mean, since you've opened the can of worms anyways, I'll go down that route also of cryptocurrencies. Okay, I mean, like not going into the entirety of cryptocurrencies, right? Because we have many types of cryptos and many of them are much useless. I was having a discussion with this brother, and I think it's quite interesting, the perspective he looks at things. So we were discussing, and he was saying, no, we should adopt Bitcoin as the standard or the mode of exchange between people. And many people are doing that. Many businesses are accepting Bitcoin. We have countries that have made it legal tender. So I asked him, like, why? Why do you want to go for Bitcoin? And look at the volatility in the market. Today it's something, tomorrow it's something. Yep. So he had a very interesting point, which I never heard from anyone. And he said that this fluctuation is the price that I'm paying to step out of the riba ecosystem that we've built from fiat.
Yep.
It is quite an interesting take. I mean, you usually don't see these kind of answers, and Bitcoin's tokenomics and everything behind it looks interesting. I mean, as we move forward and adoption increases, it could become a potential world currency as well.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, I was not hinting to any specific side of the things that I believe. Rather, what I was thinking is this is one of the aspects why some of the Sharia scholars still have some reservations on saying it's halal or haram. But end of the day, what Sharia scholars would look at is how people adopt it, how they use it. I think we recently had a forum as well. We discussed at length, and that's the main outcome. Scholars will take some time. I think it's not only for Sharia scholars, for the legal practitioners, for the regulators as well. The regulators will also sit back and see how the behaviors of the people are driven by this new way of doing things. If it's beneficial, it just needs some tweaks, so they will come in, they will put some regulations. If it's entirely or majority in a majority is harmful, they will just ban it. So for Sharia scholars as well, Sharia scholars have no issue with the technology, with blockchain, with new innovations, nothing like that. But at the same time, Sharia scholars are not over excited about those as well. So Sharia scholars will just look at anything beneficial. Okay, if it's not beneficial, it's harmful, then they will be having reservations.
All right, Jazakumullah khair.
Oh, yeah.
Moving forward, now this next question, it's interesting, and for me, it has been really confusing. So, how do we make sense of this percentage that we usually find of something being non-Sharia compliant? So, let's say there's this cap of 30 or 33%, some say 5% for objects, stocks, or investments. How do we make sense of these numbers? Because from what I understand, these numbers came up in the late 1990s or 1980s by a team led by Mufti Taqi. And at that time, there were no Sharia compliant stocks for people to invest in. So they came up with this screening guide. How is it still applicable today when we have so many Sharia compliant products? Why are we still using this standard, which maybe some might argue is obsolete?
Yeah. It's a very good question, and something that often comes to whenever someone sees the screening criteria, this is something that obviously will come into the mind. Like, why is it that 30% threshold for interest-bearing loan or interest-bearing financing, interest-bearing deposit, or why is there 5% threshold for non-halal income? How does it make sense? So, as I was emphasizing a few times, that if we look from this perspective, that we are in a journey to gradually come from a conventional banking or financial system or economic system to a halal economics or halal economy or halal financial system. So from that point of view, if you look at various jurisdictions, like if we talk about Malaysia, maybe we will find companies having 100% relationship with Islamic banks, because there are a lot of Islamic banks, mashallah, and maybe the same scenario for other Muslim countries as well. But it may not be the same for countries which has less Islamic banks, or the market share is still low, or the country is just about to start Islamic banking. Now, in those countries, as we know, the capital market is like a fuel for the economy, is a very important fuel for the economy. Much more important even from the banking sector, so that we can redirect our money to the real economy and real businesses. So from that point of view, if we from the bigger maslaha, bigger public interest of the economy of the, yeah, what scholars wanted to do is, okay, since we cannot eliminate 100% riba at this point of time, can we agree on a threshold? So there is some such precedents in many fiqh literature, where we will find some of the things are not Sharia compliant and some are Sharia compliant. And a threshold of 1/3 or 30% or 33%, sorry, 33% is something that the fiqh has agreed upon in many cases. And the root of that is a hadith where Prophet ﷺ was at the side of a companion radiallahu anh, who was quite sick, and he thought that he will be leaving the world very soon, and he wanted to donate his entire wealth. So Prophet ﷺ stopped him and said, like, it's quite a huge amount. Why not you don't reconsider? So then the Sahabi, he mentioned, okay, I want to donate 2/3 of my wealth, and then half of my wealth, until he said 1/3 of the wealth. So Prophet ﷺ said, okay, as-sulus wa sulusu kathir. The sulus, or 1/3, is already quite enough, quite good. And then he also made a remark that for us to leave our next generation with some mal, with some wealth, is good or better than leaving them empty-handed. So they have no choice but to beg, nauzubillah. So anyway, so that tradition of as-sulusu kathir, that 1/3 is already good enough or big amount, is taken together with another legal maxim, and that legal maxim is where al-hukmu, basically hukmul, sorry, anyway, I don't recall the exact maxim here, but the essence of the maxim is, sorry, lil akthari hukmul kull, I recall it, lil akthari hukmul kull. For the the majority takes the ruling of the entirety. So basically, if in some cases, we may not have the entire element or entire substance at one state. So some may be one state and some may be another state. Let's say if it comes to our water being pure or not pure, maybe it's not right. It's not the proper example, but we may have some other such examples as well. So we will take, okay, at least let's be specific on what's the ruling of the majority. If the majority is halal, we can consider it halal. So from that point of view, okay, now what should be considered as majority? We have another hadith where as-sulusu kathir, as I mentioned, that 1/3 is considered majority. So from that point of view, scholars have argued, okay, if riba, if a company is involved with banking transactions with a conventional bank, so it has interest-bearing loan. Now, can we consider that the company is in its entirety involved in ribawi transactions? The answer is no, because maybe it doesn't have all the loans or finances based on interest. So what could be the threshold that we can consider as tolerable? So that's where you take the sulus, and the sulus is basically 33%. Some try to be more conservative, so even they have come 3% down, so considering this as 30%. So that's the basic of thing. For the 5%, almost same thing, but 5% it's much more conservative because the entire 5% is non-halal. For the 30%, what we are saying is that 30% interest bearing loan, but the interest is being paid by the company. It's not coming into the company, right? But when it comes to earning of from any non-halal element, even more than 5% or more would be considered quite substantive. Now, from those point of view, the scholars have said that. Now, again, this is like a temporary measure. So let's say in the next few years, inshallah, right? We have Islamic banking market share quite big. So people do not usually have to bank with conventional banking. Maybe those measures will be revised, right? This is number one. Secondly, the thresholds do not give the impression in any manner that this percentage is halal, right? We are not saying, the scholars are not saying that non-halal income up to 5% becomes halal. Nauzubillah, it's never like that. And that is why you have to purify. You have to get rid of those once you get the dividend. You have to give to charity, to donation, this and that. So I hope this gives a broader understanding. It's a temporary measure, and inshallah, once the ecosystem has more and more Islamic financial institutions, more vehicles, maybe the measures could be much more conservative, and at some point, any riba or any non-halal will not be tolerated. So now, one last thing I would end, Brother Zahid, is let's say I'm a business owner, right? So this is for the ones who are investing into someone else's companies, and he wants to just screen, okay, should I consider this halal or not halal? So these are the metrics. But if I am a business owner, does it mean that it gives me the permission that I can deal with interest-bearing banking up to 30%? Or I can keep non-halal income up to 5%? Never. Never. As a Muslim, as a believer, I need to educate myself. I need to learn what makes it halal and what makes it haram. And if it's a country where I don't have Islamic banking, it's a different thing altogether. But if there are Islamic banking, I have no choice but to bank with Islamic banking and not go to interest, not go to any non-halal income. I should not keep wine in my grocery. As a believer, I should submit in those cases to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should not mingle this between a business owner and the one who is investing into someone else's business. There is a clear distinction between the two. Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakallah khair. I think the highlighting the part of it being temporary is very important, because if we say 30%, 5%, then people start becoming comfortable around that percentage, right? So maybe down the line we could say, okay, every 2 years 1% keeps reducing till it becomes 0%. It'll push people to be compliant in that 2 years.
Yeah, it requires a lot of courage.
Yeah, definitely.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Taking on the world.
Yeah.
All right. So moving forward to the next question that we have here, and it's a 2 question in one, right? It's the famous question on the permissibility or the impermissibility of student loans and home mortgages. And the usual answer to this that people give is it's because of darura. So what even is darura? How do we define darura? How do we understand darura? And then the second question of the student loans and home loans.
Basically, those questions come from our brothers and sisters who live in a country where the Islamic options are not available or very less, maybe not in their area. So usually my stance is, in those cases, I conserve myself from any response, because it's the general ruling is what we have shared so far. But considering the situation on the ground, there are exceptions given case by case basis by the local ulama who knows the situation better. So I'm not in a position. I haven't lived in a such a country, so I'm not aware of the hardships. Of course, now, I mean, it's a global world. We have everything in our fingertips. But then again, we respect the local scholars, the local ulama, and I would, Brother Zahid, I would reserve myself from responding to this. Rather, I would suggest our audience to reach out to the local ulama, the ones who are aware of the scenarios. And please, one thing I would comment here. So in such cases, we often go to a famous Q&A website online and just try to Google it and take the answer. You see, every fatwa has a istifta. Istifta means the question of the opinion regarding the query regarding the Sharia opinion, and the fatwa is the opinion. So we only look at the opinion and we take it. But we disregard the scenario that was presented to the Mufti for the consideration of the opinion. Now, the ground rules are always the same. Riba is haram is the same thing. Everywhere in the world, everyone will say the same. Conventional banking is riba, is the same ruling as well. But on a case-by-case basis, because of the situation on the ground, because of the situation of the Mustafti, the one who is asking the question, a lot of variables are there based on which the Shaykh may give him a different ruling. And that's the blessing of Sharia. If we follow that, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us, basically, I mean, will save us from the punishments, inshallah. No issue on that. But what I'm encouraging all of us is to reach to the local ulama, to establish relationship with them, to enter, to sit in their durus and ask them question and share with them our situation, so that we get a better guidance, which can be applicable to our life, inshallah. Jazakallah.
Mufti Yousuf, could you but still touch upon the concept of darura? Like, what does it mean and how do we understand it? Because we see that term being used quite often, right? So how would you easily explain this concept? Or are there any guidelines to what constitutes darura?
So there are similar 5 similar concepts we can say, like zorura, haja, manfa'a, zina, fuzul. So zorura is, if we don't take it or if we don't do it, there is a potential of loss of life or loss of limbs. That's how zorura has been often defined by the scholars. Haja is where we don't have a potential loss of limb or life, but it will incur us into extreme hardship. Now, what is hardship? We cannot define, right? So that is something subjective. And again, this is where the scholars will speak to the person, and it's not that the scholars will create the ruling, but in line with the guidance, they will say, okay, I believe this is the best suited for you. Then we have manfa. Manfa is, if we take this, then we will have some benefit, but if we don't take it, there will be no harm, right? So it's neutral. If we take it, we have benefit, but if we don't take it, there will be no issue. Zina is like, we may not have an additional utility, but we may have some comfort in our heart. And then fuzul. Fuzul is basically something additional to all of those. And we may have some comfort in our body, in our heart, but it's more a wastage usually. It's more a tabzir. Now the first two, which is zorura and haja, either something that if we don't do, it causes a loss of limb or loss of life, or it causes extreme hardship. Those are the two in which Sharia has given a lot of concessions. The scholars have said, okay, you have zurura, and then there are multiple legal maxims around it as well, like a zurura tataqaddaru bi qadriha. The zurura will be always determined based on the how we can translate it, like based on the situation, based on the nature, like it will be also always limited. Like for example, Dorura is for me to if I don't consume it, then I may expect a loss of life or loss of limb, something. Then in that case, the fulfillment of Zorura would be with that very specific or small amount that just allows me to live by within that situation. So something like that. It's not that Zorura, there is a situation of Zorura and suddenly everything becomes halal for me. No, there will not be like that, but it will be limited to overcome the situation. So as we can understand from what I tried to explain is that scholars have gone extra mile and done a lot of research on when and how much concession can be given to an individual based on and what could be also considered Zorura. Why is this? End of the day, why is this? Because when something has been prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to go against it, it's a major non-conformation with the requirement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is what causes punishment, wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all those things. So to go against that or to give concessions, there is a very, very specific methodology scholars have driven. Of course, in Quran also we'll see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given concessions when someone is marid, someone is sick or is traveling, for example. So concessions are given in terms of salah, in terms of siyam, like fasting, prayer, etc., etc. And the same can be extended in many cases, but we have to be mindful of those things.
Jazakumullah khair. Moving forward then to the next question, and this is a question we get very often, is how do we understand riba when it comes to currency exchange or transfer of funds?
In currency exchange, it's basically riba al-fadl or riba al-buyu'. That at the very beginning I shared this hadith from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri reported by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, where Prophet ﷺ mentioned about 6 commodities. The first 2 are the gold and silver. Now, the gold and silver has the ruling of sarf, sarf, or the rulings of currencies exchange, where it is very specifically mentioned in that hadith that it has to be the gold and silver must be transacted yadan bi yadin and mislan bi mislan, meaning on a spot and on equal value. Of course, the ruling is there could be 2 situations, like when we are selling gold for gold or we are selling gold for silver, right? Or vice versa. So when we are transacting with the same category, gold versus gold, then we have to adhere to 2 conditions. Number 1, it must be spot, and number 2, it must be of equal value. So 1 ounce, 1 gram gold versus 1 gram gold, for example. But if it is not the same category, so gold versus silver, then we must still adhere to the first condition of transacting on a spot. But the second condition, which is of equal value, is no longer required. So we may exchange 1 gram gold versus, let's say, 10 grams of silver, no issue. Now, when we have transitioned from the barter trade to gold and silver, dirham, dinar, and then now to paper currency, digital currency. So with the paper currency and digital currency, let's talk about paper currency first. When paper currency started, scholars have researched argued, debated, and kind of, we can say, resolved that the paper currency will also have similar impacts, or similar ruling, rather, I would say, similar rulings of gold and silver when it comes to riba, when it comes to paying zakat, when it comes to many other Sharia rulings, right? So from that point of view, if today, as per IOFI share standard and other international Fiqh Academy resolutions as well, if we are transacting, let's say, US dollar versus UK pound, British pound, for example, then we have to adhere to the first condition of transacting on spot. And if we are transacting with the same currency, let's say dollar versus dollar, then we have two conditions, being spot as well as of equal value. So we cannot trade $100 versus two with $110, for example. That will make it riba. So I think that's the summary of the entire discussion of riba in currency exchange. Thank you.
But how do we understand the concept of hand to hand over here? Because when I'm sending, let's say, money from Malaysia to America, the money is,
Right.
of course, not being exchanged. When the currency exchange happens, it's not happening on the spot. Sometimes it might reach them a day later. So
Right.
how do we tackle that?
So the hand by hand, or yadan yadin, has been explained or interpreted as being on same majlis. Now, what is majlis? Majlis means the sitting arrangement or the session, the meeting place where transactions used to happen, right? So what scholars initially said is that you have to transact in the same majlis, like in the same meeting. You have to give both counter values. You give gold, I give silver, or you give gold, I give gold. Now the majlis, as we know today, it's no longer physical. Today, we transact online through our mobile phones, through email, through web portals, and we often even don't know who is the other party. We transact with the platform, or with someone sitting on the other side, but we know the details. Now, considering the modern situation, the majlis would be that first and foremost, we transact within the same day, right? Because for the base of the reason of having one of the reasons of making it on spot is so that no party gains or loses due to the fluctuations of the value, because we don't want the gold and silver or other currencies become a commodity itself. That's where people would like to gain from the fluctuations. So in line with that, we try to minimize the fluctuations, and the same day transaction is fair enough. However, due to international trades and transactions, we may transact the same day, but the counterparty may receive it in maximum T+2 days, for example. So on the day after the day of transaction, maybe he will receive in 1 or 2 more days due to international SWIFT and other issues. So that is still considered tolerable as long as the initiation of the transactions are on same day between the two counterparties. I hope that answers your question, Brother Zahid.
Yes, yes. Jazakallah khair. So just building on the same question, we have a similar question on gold. How do we exchange gold? Like, how do we understand the element of riba? If I'm going to go sell gold in the market, can I just exchange gold for gold, or how does it work?
I think we just answered that. So for gold also is the same ruling. We have to transact on the same day, at least. The best is if we are buying and selling in a physical session, we should follow the hadith as much as we can to transact in the same session. Let's say we are going to a jewelry, so we purchase a gold jewelry, we pay it right on the spot, right? So that's what we should do. But for whatever reason, if it's not on a spot, I mean on the same physical session, we should at least do within the same day to adhere to the hadith. Yeah.
So based on what you just mentioned right now, so what I understand is, because if I'm going to go exchange gold, let's say I have 100 grams of gold and it's old gold, no seller is going to give me 100 grams of new gold at the same time, right? So from what I understand here is, we take our old gold, we sell it off, we get the price, Then using that money, we go buy the new gold. We don't exchange gold to gold directly.
I see. Okay, if you're asking about transacting gold for gold, right? So in such cases, we have to be aware of the weight of the gold. So both should be of equal weight. Now the question would be, let's say we are exchanging gold bar or pure gold or raw gold, not raw gold. I think let's call it gold bar with, let's say, jewelry, where you cannot make jewelry out of pure gold, so you have to mix some other metals, right? Now, do we consider the gold in the jewelry as its entirety, which also includes some non-gold metals, or we consider only the gold element? So there are fiqh literature, discussing on those things. In general, if I recall properly, the scholars majority, they would say that if the non-gold metal is just a tiny part, we'll consider the entirety as gold. So meaning that, let's say the entire jewelry is 10 grams, and we are exchanging that with 10 grams of gold bar or pure gold. Right? So there shouldn't be any increase in either of the counter value. Now, if there is, but or whatever reason we want to, so this is where what you have mentioned. So we should first sell the one of the counter values against any other currency like cash or silver or whatever. And then with that, we should buy the other counter value that we want to buy. Thank you.
Because usually what happens is when you go to these places, they will take your old gold and they will say, you pay us an extra amount on top of it as a service fee, and then we'll give you the new gold. So that would tantamount to being riba, correct?
No, usually the practice is if someone goes to a jewelry that I want to exchange my old jewelry. So what they would do, they would basically value it. So they will cut off the what they call makeup charge, making charge, and maybe some other decrease in value as well. Whatever they have, their own valuation methodology. And in line with that, they will say, okay, now you are selling to me this, and I owe you, for example, $1,000. Now the person who came to sell that, he can use that $1,000 to purchase another gold. So we will not be considering this as gold for gold. This is actually he's selling gold for the value, and then I think there is a catch. Maybe perhaps you are asking about that, because he's not getting the amount in cash, right? So that's a important consideration. I'm not sure what other fuqaha would say about this, but it would be safer if he gets it paid in cash and then proceeds with the purchase of the new jewelry.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest and the safest way. Just
Yeah.
sell it off and then go buy it in a clean manner.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So our next question, it's a bit general. We are very close to wrapping up our session for today. What would be a blueprint that you would give our listeners to identify and navigate riba in our day-to-day society? How do we identify?
So a very general way to identify is when we are getting any increase in the name of profit or return, whatever, without any a risk of underlying business or asset or service. So that should make us a bit suspicious. So we go and further try to understand what is the mechanism and how is this designed, structured. So that's one way to look into it. But again, as I mentioned in the very beginning, that riba is a topic where even some companions Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in shared that maybe we didn't understand riba as a whole, right? So there are many branches, many ways to look into it. What I would suggest all of our audience, two things. Number one is, of course, please invest in educating yourself, invest in knowledge. Think this as an investment in akhirah. Because even during the time of companions Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, let's say during the time of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, the second caliph of Islam. It is recorded that he used to go to the market, Medina market himself, and look for sellers who didn't have understanding of riba. And sometimes he would beat a bit, using his stick in hand, saying that if you don't know riba, what is riba, it is highly likely that you will get involved in riba unknowingly. So this was 14 centuries back. What about now? Now we have so many variations of riba, right? So if we don't know, there is a high chance that we may get involved in riba. Nauzubillah. Even though we are praying, we are fasting, we are doing a lot of amal, we are very good to people, but we may still be involved in riba. So the very important thing is, please invest your time to understand riba. And now with the blessing of technology, we have so many lectures, we have so many explanations by scholars around the globe. If you want to read text, there are so many texts, there are books. Just need to make some time. This is number one. And second, of course, even though you are reading yourself, there are many variations which may give you a bit of doubt, but you may not have clarity. Right. So in this case, the principle Professor Islam has shared with us is da'ma yuribuka ila ma la yuribuk. Leave what is doubtful and stick to what is doubtless. Right. So if it is doubtful, the first take some time. Don't involve in it right away, and get clarity by asking. Fas'alu ahla dhikri in kuntum la ta'lamun. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned, ask the people of dhikr, the people of knowledge, if you don't know. So ask them, ask people, ask the fuqaha, ask the ulama, get clarity, and then only act upon it. And that would be my my advice to the audience today. Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakumullah khair, Mufti Yousuf, for sharing that. Moving forward, as human beings, we all make errors. We fall into these mistakes, right? And we might have directly or indirectly dealt with riba or even gained riba into our accounts. So let's say a person has gotten this riba funds now into their account. How do we deal with this money? How do we get rid of this? Is there a certain place we give this money, or are there only certain people we give this money to? How do we navigate the situation?
Yeah, thank you. Very pertinent question. First and foremost, I believe we have understood a very important action point throughout our discussion today, that we should take every step to get out of riba. So if we have accounts with conventional banks, for example, we have ribawi transactions, we must try our best to close those or minimize our involvement with those and all those things. But even if we're doing all those things, we may have some riba coming to our accounts, even though we don't want it. So how do we deal with those? That's the question, Brother Zahid, I believe you are asking. So in such cases, with the fuqaha, this is not only for riba, but let's say any other way, other haram earning. So for example, let's say someone has earned haram in a non-halal manner through some other ways, for example, through corruption, through maybe some falsification or forgery, some theft, etc. And he doesn't know the actual owner. Right? When we, na'uzubillah, if any one of us have got involved into eating someone else's wealth in any way, in an unjust manner, without any proper transaction, permission, etc., the first thing the one should do is give the wealth back to the person. And secondly, of course, seek tawbah, go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do istighfar, etc. But let's say we don't know who is the person, or there is no way to give him back. So in all such cases, the ruling is same. We have to dispose it off from our ownership. Now, how we dispose it off? Do we go to the sea beach and just put it off in the sea? No, because that would be a destruction of wealth, which could be utilized in a much better manner. So the ruling Sharia scholars have mentioned, or Fuqaha has mentioned, that you can give to charity. It shouldn't benefit you directly or indirectly. So we can give it to charity, but we shouldn't even The fuqaha have gone to that extent that we shouldn't even intend for rewards, because it is not something that we have earned in a legitimate way. It has just come into our wallet and we just need to get rid of it. But when we are in the process of getting rid of it, there are various ways we can utilize it in a better manner. And I believe Global Sadaqah also has some initiatives. You can share that, where people can get rid of those non-halal wealth in a better manner, so that it also benefits those who are eligible in the society. Maybe you can share the initiative, Brother Zahid.
Yes, I'll do that. Jazakumullah khair. So at Global Sadaqah, we've provided a campaign that we've shared in the chat for the people to look at, for called Purifying Your Wealth. So this campaign is a pool that we've created where people can put in their funds, and the team will be channeling it to the fuqara and the masakin and all the people who are in need and who are screened by our internal Sharia team. And updates will be sent out to all the donors, and so you know where the money has been utilized. I think a very important point Mufti touched on, and that's a major misconception that many people have, is about the money itself. Like, people just go throw it away. No, you can't. It doesn't make sense. It's like when money changes hands, the ruling on it changes as well. So if, let's say, somebody robs a bank and he goes to the shop, him spending that money is wrong. But for the person, the shopkeeper, to accept that money, it's halal for him. So the money itself doesn't become haram. What you're doing is the wrong part. I think that was a very, very important clarification that we got. Jazakumullah khair, Mufti Yousuf, for that.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have any questions? All right. We have a question that says, is it allowed to pay minimum payment for Islamic credit card bills?
So when it comes to Islamic credit cards, I cannot comment, because there are Sharia advisors on the board, I assume, and they have gone through the process. They have approved a card. So if you see if you basically interact with such financial institution where Sharia board members are there, you can rely on their justification, their research, because there are many situations or considerations taken into consideration when approving a product. So if it's Islamic credit cards, is different. But if you're asking the same question about conventional credit card, we get this question a lot, that people ask, okay, can we use conventional credit card, whereby we will be paying on time and we will be avoiding a charge of riba, right? Charging any interest. So the response to that is that the agreement itself is an agreement of riba. And Prophet ﷺ has cursed, he cursed the one who consumes riba, the one who gives riba, the one who witnesses the contracts of riba, etc. So we should basically be concerned about those credit card, conventional credit card in all circumstances, until and unless if it's a country where you don't have any Islamic financial institution and it's a dire need to use credit card for whatever reason, you can consult with local ulama as well. In those cases, the scholars have said, okay, you use it, but you do every step you can do to avoid interest charge, basically. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khair. I think we've overshot time quite a bit over here, so we'll bring it to a close. But before closing, I'd like to give a very short announcement. The Global Sadaqah team, we've come up with an ebook recently. It's a collection of 40 hadiths on Sadaqah. And this is, I think, the first time that such a compilation is being made in the English language. We've had a few here and there as part of larger collections in Arabic, but this is the first time such a compilation from the 40 hadith genre. It's happened in the English language. So I would request all our viewers and our audience to go follow our social media handles for Global Sadaqah as well as Adal Advisory. And we will be announcing when the book is being launched. It will be launched next week, but the exact date, and the book is for free, of course. But to get it, you'll have to follow all our social media channels, inshallah. All right. So As we are closing, Jazakumullah khair, Mufti Yousuf, for taking the time out. It has been a pleasure speaking to you as usual. And we'd like to thank you, all of us in the team over here, taking the time out after a very long day, hectic day, to educate us and to spend time with us. Jazakumullah khair.
Wayakum, Jazakumullah khairan, and thank you so much, Brother Zahid, for a very interactive discussion. Before I finish, I just want to address this question by one of the audience, where he asked, what is the best way to inform others about the importance of knowing riba? I think the first step is just to initiate that conversation. That's the best way. When you start conversation, you interact, you can ask, okay, what do you know about riba? Do you know about riba? You can share what knowledge you have. The Prophet ﷺ, during his last Hajj, he said, "Ballighu anni walau ayah." Share about, from me, even if it's one single verse, or even it's a small thing that you want to share. So please share. Please share the words about with your family, with your relatives, with your friends, children, parents, and inshallah, it's a journey again. We all in the same journey. Inshallah, we'll see a riba-free economy anytime soon, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan.
Inshallah, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, Mufti Yousuf. I would like to thank all our global audience for tuning in and taking this journey with us as we deep dived into riba. And as I mentioned, do follow the social media for Adal Advisory as well, because they have such events on a weekly basis. And it's a treasure trove of knowledge that we should make the most out of. So again, Jazakumullah khair for attending. We wrap up today's session. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.